Здравствуйте, уважаемые участники ежегодной конференции форума доноров. Для нас большая честь приветствовать вас
Good
сейчас.
afternoon, dear participants of the Russian Donor Forum annual conference. And this is perhaps the most international session of our conference. If you don't mind, I'm going to switch to English because most of our speakers on this panel will be speaking in English. So
hello everybody, and our dear speakers, thank you so much for joining us today. And first of all, I would like to start with our huge thanks to the Andrei Malenchenko Foundation, who have supported this session. And this is the second year in a row that the Andrei Malenchenko Foundation is supporting our conference, and we are really grateful that they are contributing to strengthening the Russian philanthropic sector by giving us access to international expertise. And today we are honored to have Ilya Tipunin, who is the CEO, Executive Director of the Andrei Malenchenko Foundation. Hello, Ilya. Thank you so much for joining us. If you could say a couple of words, that will be great.
Hello to everybody. And first of all, I want to say thank you very much to organizers of the conference for the possibility to tell you about what we like and what we believe. So, can I start? Yeah?
Yes, please.
Our foundation developed a support program for gifted children in the regions of Russia from October of 2016, so it is 4 years now. And the aim of the program is to deepen the study of the natural sciences and develop the potential of gifted children in their hometowns. We believe that every children should have equal opportunity in education, but in Russia, and I think not only in Russia, in other countries as well, there are such a problem that in the capital or in the big cities, children can have more or less good education, but in towns which are far from big cities, it is not so. And we try to give really good education for children who lives in small towns in Russia, in Siberia, in different regions of Russia. And we work with talented children in mathematics, physics, chemistry, in natural sciences, and in engineering, like robototechnic, engineering itself, modeling, and so on. We believe that such people, if they realize their potential, they are very important for humanity, and it's also, of course, it's very important for these children to realize their potential. Some words about our program. We make centers, educational centers in regions, in Russian regions, in small towns, in which children can get good education, where they have access to laboratories, where they have access to good teachers, and they can get education in their own town where they live. They should not travel to other region of the country. we start studying from fifth year of their school education. So it is approximately 10, 11 years old children, and teach them till they end the secondary school. So it is 18 years old people. And then we also support their education in the universities. Of course, we support only that people who show good, who show good success in school part of education, of their education. So we try to then we try to help for their adaptation in their professional life, to have work in good companies or to work in science and so on. Another part of this program, we try to develop environment in their own towns in which such gifted children or gifted people can communicate between each other and have such an environment for communication and self-development. So we have also program for education of teachers in that small towns, and we try to adopt some children when they end the school to study in local universities and then come back to their towns to work like teachers for these talented people in their towns. In this way, we try to construct such a scientific environment in their towns. Very important thing for us, it is what we call the social lifts for children. We have a system of activities that helps to our pupil to show themselves and to check their knowledge and their education, when they can communicate with also talented people from other countries and compare themselves with these children. So we have we work with greatest world competitions and greatest world fairs in science and engineering. For example, one of such fairs is ISEF. It is International Science and Education Fair, which is based in United States and has associated fairs in different countries. So now we have our own fair, which is associated with ISEF, and our children can take a part in this fair in United States. And yeah, 2 years ago we also had fourth place. We took fourth place on this fair in robototechnic. So this is very important for us, because it is such an objective estimation of our success. And sorry?
That's amazing, Ilya. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yes. We also has good contact with several Chinese fairs. We work with Sun Xinlin Foundation. It is maybe the most famous foundation in China, and together with them, our children take part in Chinese competitions between talented people, talented children. So this is all. So as I said, this is also very important part of our program. So to maybe to make such a resume of what I said, the first part of our program is to give good education for gifted children from the small towns in Russia. And the second one is to show them that they live in big world, they have many opportunities in this big world, and they can use their possibilities, their talent to work in different directions, in different places in the world, and they understand what their level comparing with level of other children from other parts of the world. So maybe I can stop at this point. If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer for them. So thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Ilya, for this. Thank you. That's really great to learn in more details about your programs, and especially about your collaboration with the Chinese Foundation. And now it is really great that I could introduce other panel speakers of our session. And as I said, that it is probably going to be one of the most international sessions that we are going to host during the conference. And I would like to greet all of you. Since this is a session on philanthropy in BRICS countries, I'm really glad to say that we have representatives of all BRICS countries. So this is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And Nick Rocky, who represents South Africa, and he's managing director Trilogue. Евгений, можно, пожалуйста, вид галереи сделать?
Hi there. Hi. Lovely to be here.
Then we are also happy to have today two speakers from South Africa, as Nick represents the corporate social investment side. We have also Louise Driver, who is Executive Director at Independent Philanthropy Association of South Africa. Hello, Louise.
Hi, Alina. Thanks for the invitation to be part of this panel.
Lovely. We also have Andrea Daginshai, who represents Brazil today, and Andrea is director of the Brazilian Foundation Institute Ibirapitanga. Hello, Andrea.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you, Alina.
And we're also happy to have a representative of China. This is Tao Ze, who is founder and president of Yishan. This is China Philanthropy Data Center. That's so good to have you here today, Tao.
It's my pleasure to be here.
And last but not least, hello, Priya. Priya Naik is director of CEO and founder at Samhita Social Ventures, and she represents India today. Hello, Priya.
Hi, Lena. It's such a pleasure to be here. And hello, Nick. It's good to see you again.
And of course, my fellow representative from Russia, this is Roman Sklotsky, who is the director of the Center for Philanthropy Development at the Vladimir Putin Foundation. Hello, Roman.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here with you today.
That's great. Thank you so much, all. And I think that we will proceed now to our panel discussion first. So basically, we will have a round of speeches, and then we'll proceed to the discussion of the most relevant issues that we would like to explore within the theme of our conference, which is Sustainable Development Goals and COVID-19 effect, of course, as well. But let me start first with Nick. Hi, Nick, again. So basically, we first of all would like to congratulate on an amazing conference that Nick's company Trialog has just hosted for South African companies. And so, Nick, if you could, share some insights how South African companies fared during the COVID crisis, whether they managed to find the best approach during this pandemic, whether they proved to be effective. That would be great if you could share these insights from the South African perspective.
Thank you very much. So you asked us to identify some trends, and I'll just touch on three. We think that there's sort of 10 anticipated trends that we're seeing in our country. But three that I think are worth mentioning. One is about increased integration and this notion of shared value, which we're starting to see come through very much strongly. And if you're at a conference on SDGs, we see the shared value contribution coming through the foundation and the CSI program. CSI, for us, we talk about corporate social investment, and how the CSI or foundation work supports the purpose-driven companies in terms of their approach towards serving societal interests and ultimately through to supporting the SDGs. We're seeing a lot more applied measurement, monitoring, and evaluation. Companies often aspire to measuring the results of their work. Not all of them are getting it right, so there's still a lot of data without meaning, but increasingly companies are focusing on whether their development efforts are being achieved. And then we're seeing a lot more collaboration. Companies often work in partnerships, but we're starting to see the emergence of more collaborative initiatives. And then from a COVID point of view, we do an annual publication, and we do research for that every year. And the research, which was undertaken 2 to 4 months ago, asking companies specifically around their response to COVID, firstly from a funding perspective, we found that there were almost an equal number of companies that had spent more than those that had spent less. About 25% had spent more, and 25% had decreased funding or stopped funding altogether. Whereas if you asked NPOs, the picture was slightly different, and whereas 15% of NPOs felt they'd increased funding, about 44% had either decreased or experienced a discontinuation of funding. And the difference we see is primarily because in South Africa, about 50% of all corporate funding goes into education. Whereas in the time of COVID, when companies were reacting in the short term to COVID, money got channeled into food security, healthcare, and community development at a much higher rate. So those NPOs, nonprofits that were working in some of the other sectors were experiencing more of a decline in funding. And then we also we asked a question around whether NPOs had to change or reduce their programmatic work, and we found 4 out of 5 had to actually shift the way that they worked it or declined their programs, cut back on their various programs. We also ran a poll at our conference literally last week, a few days ago, and the numbers have moved since we did the research. So at the poll, we found that 19% of NPOs and corporates had shown greater funding 50% a decline in funding, and 10% budgets on hold or ceased, with about 20% saying no impact. So a much greater number seeing money decline in the sector. And if we ask about where this is going, we see the COVID response in three phases. One being react, then adapt, and then build. And I think we're through the reaction phase. Although the needs haven't declined, there is a certain amount of fatigue around short-term relief measures, and companies and NPOs now starting to think how they adapt to what is becoming fast a new norm and a new situation. And then they will move into the build situation, and we most certainly will see different outcomes going into the build situation, with things like distance education coming through. We also are concerned about the fact that companies have stepped up to the plate with budgets for now, given the urgency of the situation, but that the economy has been bruised quite badly, and with companies basing their amount of giving on net profit after tax, we almost certainly will see a decline in company revenues. And we're also seeing NPOs spending money, but in the face of reduced funding, therefore having to tap into reserves. So we see this as a little bit of a perfect storm going forward, and next year we think is going to be really tough for these declines in spending coming through into the non-profit sector, and NPOs using up their reserves, and yet having massive demand for still emergency relief, but also for reprogramming and investing in different types of interventions. So that's a quick snapshot.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick, for sharing all of this. And that's great that you have conducted this survey to get the idea how companies behave during the crisis, and that you have also this data on NGOs. I would like to give the floor to Louise now, because she also represents South Africa, and it will be really great to see the perspective of foundations and the philanthropic sector of the country. Louise?
Thanks, Alina. So yeah, just looking at the key trends of philanthropy before COVID hit, philanthropy was very project and program focused, and funders, these private independent funders, which were quite focused on either creating their own projects or programs, or funding one alone. There wasn't a lot of collaboration, on a very surface level, but not deep collaboration between the funders. And so there was, I would say, some duplication of work, and funding wasn't always as well channeled as it could have been. And also there was still this real difficulty in working with the government, and the scale of the projects that these funders are working with and the amount of money they're working with, they needed to work with government in order to get action. So, a lot of the funding which they were giving was also restricted funding for specific projects and programs, rather than unrestricted funding, which would go to the organization or the implementation partner to use as they saw best for the organization to meet their mission. And what has been fantastic in terms of COVID, obviously a lot hasn't been fantastic, but in terms of with our funders, is that it is significantly changed their funding practice. So they are, first of all, a lot of restricted funding was changed to unrestricted funding. There was a much looser way of working with the nonprofit organizations and the other implementation partners, in terms of saying, okay, what do you think is best? How should we repurpose this funding? What additional funding do you need in order to address this immediate crisis, or to help, with what you're experiencing as an organization at the moment, or your beneficiaries are experiencing? And through that additional communication, a lot more trust was formed. There was, there's a lot being written about trust-based philanthropy, and there was a lot of trust because some of the power which philanthropy held was being passed over to the beneficiaries and those really on the ground. So it was, and this was really important because there wasn't a great support at all from our government for the non-profit sector. They did a lot for small business, and they were helping in various ways, and for certain industries they helped, but the non-profit industry was really neglected. And funders came to the party, these private funders. They created emergency funds for the non-profits to access certain funding, because a lot of the non-profits also lost their funding because people diverted their funds to COVID projects. So, and then there was also something which they did, which was great, was for the first time, there was really in-depth mapping of beneficiaries and in-depth mapping of funders to see who is funding what, where are they, where could you get support, where's the duplication, where are areas of total, absence of any funding. And it really gave a sense, first of all, the enormity of the issues that we are facing as a country, but it also was great in being able to get donors to collaborate to avoid duplication of effort and to see how most efficiently they could work with the funding they got. And I think a lot of this type of practice, which funders have been following over the last few months, will inform their future practice because they're seeing the benefits. It really, that much more lenient, flexible way of funding, much closer working with the beneficiaries, much more trust and communication, and and also working on a much higher level in terms of systems change, not just individual projects and programs, and greater collaboration among other funders because of the scale of the issues they were facing. They had to collaborate with other funders to try address those issues. And lastly, two last points. One, huge innovation coming through, really innovative ideas how to fix some of the problems through their funding. And then lastly, looking at advocacy. So, some of the funders got together and said, this is what's happening is shocking. We've got to do something about it. I'll give you an example. Our early childhood development sector was totally hit. It was devastated by the COVID crisis. They closed all the ECD centers. When the economy reopened, people going back to work, young children were being left alone at home with all things happening. It was a crisis, and a group of funders grouped together, took the government to court, one, got the ECD centers open, subsequently found that the ECD workers who were working at all these centers had not been paid their stipends for the duration, the 6 months of COVID, took the government back to court, won again, are now getting the stipends sent to all the workers. And that's the power of collective advocacy among a group of funders. So I'll stop now. I could talk forever. That is some of the work which has happened this year. It's been a phenomenal change, and I can actually say it's really, COVID has revolutionized philanthropy in South Africa.
Great, Liz, thank you. Yeah, I think that all these conversations about the consolidation of the sector, and how COVID really spurred this willingness for partnerships to be more effective, because when you come back and bring together all these efforts, you definitely manage to achieve more. Now it's really interesting to hear whether it was the same in Brazil. Andre represents today a foundation, and basically I think that you and Roman are here today to represent a private foundation. So you will give us the perspective of specific foundation who try to, like be effective during the COVID crisis. But also I know that you used to be the director of an association, which is pretty much a similar thing that we have here in Russia. Russian Donors Forum brings together both companies and foundations, and we try to be relevant for both. And if you could give us some context of the philanthropic sector in Brazil as well, and how both companies and foundations try to respond to the crisis, and how your foundations found itself during these times.
Thank you, Alina. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Thank you for the Russian Donors Forum for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here sharing this panel. I'll try to give some overview on philanthropy and how the response to COVID took place. And it's very interesting to speak after the colleagues from South Africa, as there are many similarities, as Nick was explaining in a more broader sectorial view. And also when Luis started developing more about the individual responses, it's amazing how much similarity we've seen in how Brazilian foundations and corporations have responded. First, and I'll sort of try to jump directly. I'd just like to lay out a few aspects of Brazilian philanthropy that I feel it's relevant to share. And I trust that it has also many similarities with other countries in this panel. The first thing is that philanthropy in Brazil, corporations account for a large portion of philanthropy, either direct investment for corporations or through corporate philanthropy. And this is relevant in terms of how the COVID responses was organized. The second thing is the main focus of most investments is education. It's public education. So that has been for some time. It hasn't changed over the past decades. Even though philanthropy in Brazil is a fairly new phenomenon, so it goes back to the 1990s when civil society expanded in Brazil. This is a characteristic that has remained stable. The third aspect that relates more to where I am right now is we've seen for the past few years an expansion in family philanthropy. So this is something that grew a lot in the, let's say, past 5 or 10 years. And it also has a relevant impact in how partnerships have been developed in the sector and what types of investments are being made. And along with this, we've seen growth in grant making. So the largest part of Brazilian institutional philanthropy is what we would call done by operating foundations. So the institutions are driving their own programs. And this is something that it hasn't totally changed, this balance, but we've seen consistent growth in grant making, which has led to increased support to civil society organizations, which is something we've been pushing for very long. In terms of COVID response, and again, either Nick or Luis could be speaking about Brazil pretty much with every aspect that they've explained, which is particularly interesting. One element of context that I think is important to share about Brazil is the lack of government coordination. So federal government in particular has been very weak in responding to the COVID threat, undermining and denying the threat of the pandemic. So that has led in some ways to increased coordination within civil society and private companies, which has been shown as very relevant to the overall context. One element I think it's important to share is we've seen in this context what is very likely to be the single largest grant in Brazilian history of philanthropy. It was a grant of about $1.2 billion from a Brazilian bank to COVID response, directly to the health side of the response. So that was mainly aimed at expanding infrastructure for vaccine production, increasing testing capability, increasing capacity of public hospitals, particularly for intensive care, acquisition of personal protective equipment, which was a big challenge in the first months of the pandemic in particular. So most of these resources, and it helped increase the structural capacity of response, in addition to many more dispersed efforts in terms of ensuring food security for low-income families, which was also a big challenge when the pandemic struck. At the same time, if we've seen like a high level of coordination among companies and large civil society organizations that help, channel the resources and coordinate it, what we've seen also was a large mobilization at the community level. So we've seen a lot of, even in poor communities, volunteers, organizations, community organizations getting together for ensuring food distribution, basic health and hygiene products, and communication and awareness inside the communities, which was something that was also very important since government response was slow and weak in many cases. So that in some ways ensure that some level of response was widespread throughout the country. So I have some other remarks about the post-COVID response, but I think I can save that for later in our second round. Just one brief remark about a more institutional perspective along the same lines Louise was sharing with us. We've also seen a shift in how foundations related to their grantees in many cases. So we've seen an increase in institutional support for organization with more flexibility, extending time frame for grants. And hopefully this is something that can remain in a post-COVID context. Learning from this experience in some ways, it might affect, in some degree, the relation between foundations and civil society organizations. So thank you.
That's great, Andre. Yeah, I will definitely ask you and other speakers at the end of our session what we shall take from this crisis, what should we take into the future. It's great to hear that there are so many things that corresponds with you and resonates with you after listening to our colleagues from South Africa. And now it will be really great to hear from Tao Tse, who represents China today. As you know, China was the first to report on the cases, on COVID cases, and then they were the first to impose quarantine, and basically Chinese NGOs and foundations were at the forefront at the very beginning. So Tao, if you could share with us, how was it and where is the sector now, that will be really great.
Thank you, Helena. I will use 3 slides to show some data, and then I will share my remarks. So here, right now we can see this kind of a number. It shows the donation to the COVID-19 from the general public and the corporation. So we got the first kind of people tested positive in the beginning of January. And the Chinese NGO started raising money since January 23. And we can see in the first 1 week, the Chinese NGO raised about $1 billion. And then they raised $2 billion in the first 2 weeks. So in the end, almost in the first 3 months, so the Chinese NGO raised about $5 billion to fight against the COVID-19. That's the first number. The second number is here's the donor profile. So most of the Chinese donors are corporation. The corporate, they want to take their social responsibility during this kind of crisis. So over 70% of the donation come from the corporation. About 23% come from the individual. The left come from other association or even some government agency. During the first 1 month in Wuhan, where is the first city got this COVID-19, around the whole China, from different city, different provinces, over 45,000 volunteers, teachers, doctors and nurses, they went to Wuhan. So they are kind of volunteer, join to fight against the COVID-19 to guarantee the Wuhan city had enough doctors and nurses. So that's very helpful. Besides the number, so I want to share some 3 points. The first one is by contrast to Andre, Brazil. So in China, the government almost take everything, take all the responsibility. So for example, about 2 weeks ago, there's a new, about six new people tested COVID-19 positive. So because of these 6 people, the Qingdao government shut down the city and used 1 week, it's less than 1 week, so like 5 days, to give the test for 10 million people. So we finished the 10 million people test in 5 days. So that's a huge work. So that's the government did. This kind of action will raise the question for then what's the impact of NGO? For NGO, it's very hard to test 10 million people in 5 days. So then what's our role? So after the COVID-19, the professor or some think tank or even NGO started questioning, okay, comparing to business sector, compared to public sector, what the NGO should do, especially during this kind of pandemic. So think about our nature, our future. The second one is because of this big crisis, most of the corporation and private foundation, they spent all their budget for this year for COVID-19. So in the second half of this year, we see for a lot of NGO, they couldn't get sustainable grants. So when they came to their donor, the donor said, okay, I have spent out all my budget for this year, so you need to wait for another 1 year, or maybe for another 2 or 3 years, because the boss behind the private foundation, their business are going down, so they do not have enough money put into the private foundation. So that's the second effect of COVID-19 for the NGO. The third one is to some extent it's a little bit positive for the social sector. Because of the COVID-19, in China, a lot of people started thinking about their life, the meaning of their life. So we see after the COVID-19, a lot of high net, the rich people, they started giving money. They started talking about building up private foundation. They started talking about caring others, because they find that no matter how much money they have, if some disease came, they disappear. So they want to leave something for their children, for this world. So after COVID-19, we see some people, they have no idea about philanthropy. They start thinking about they should do some philanthropy. So this kind of a good trend for the Chinese social sector. Thank you.
That's amazing, Tao. I think that this is definitely a very nice effect that we could have after the pandemic. Yeah, that people will be very conscious of the fact how they could contribute more to the society. I would like to give the floor now to Priya, who represents some key to social ventures in India. And I'm aware, Priya, that your company and your colleagues and partners managed to build really an unprecedented campaign to bring together various actors and stakeholders of the sector to really respond to the crisis more effectively. If you could share with us what was this campaign about and how the situation in the philanthropic sector was in general in India.
Thanks, Alina. And, maybe I'll just spend a minute or two talking about the background and then talk about the alliances. And it's actually wonderful to be here because you sit in your own country and you feel like you're dealing with your set of problems, and then you listen to everyone else and you realize that all over the world, it's really the same trends, right? No difference at all. And so just going back to what I heard so far, what's really common is before the pandemic, I think like Nick talked about, corporates were getting more strategic, they were getting more collaborative, more focused on impact, but I think it was the beginning of intent rather than any of this happening at scale. And then the pandemic changed all of that. So the first 2 months were terrible for India. India went through one of the worst, the strictest lockdowns anywhere in the world. And what that basically did were really three things. One, it exposed how weak our healthcare infrastructure was. There were horrifying stories of people not knowing what to do, people going to hospitals which were full, medical staff was not trained. The second thing, and I think the world kind of watched, our misery, was what happened to the migrants. A lockdown was announced very, very quickly, and hundreds of millions of people who actually come from rural areas but work in cities were just stranded. They lost their jobs, they didn't know how to get back home. It was heartbreaking, right, what we saw. And the third was just this uncertainty. No one knew what the new world looks like and when things get back to normal. And so from a corporate response perspective, no surprises, which is a bulk of the money actually went for food, healthcare, migrants, and looking after communities. The second thing that also shook us was the Prime Minister launched an initiative called PM Cares, and everyone was asked to donate to PM Cares, which meant that any money that was available in the sector really got swept up by the government. Very little money actually available for the nonprofit community to even respond to. And in any case, nonprofits who are otherwise doing work on women's empowerment or education had all just stopped doing what they were doing and just responding to the migrant crisis or the community crisis at a time when they weren't even allowed to step out. The first few months were just terrible. I think the way we see it right now is sort of a mixed bag, which is, India's kind of going through a K-shaped curve, which means some companies, some NGOs are just going to get bigger and better because they have been able to take advantage of the crisis, while others are just going to shrink very significantly. And, as it is as a country which faces inequity on a day-to-day basis, we can't afford a K-shaped growth, where some people do well and then the vast majority actually just plummet back into poverty. I think the World Bank has talked about how 500 million people who came into the middle class will now be pushed back into poverty, and India will bear a very significant proportion of that burden. So some of the bad news, I think, similar to what I have heard so far, which is a government that was attempting to do its best, but not necessarily being collaborative with the sector. The last few weeks, we've had one adverse NGO regulation after another. 3 weeks ago, there was a regulation which actually is debilitating for the sector. So basically, any money that was coming from foreign sources now cannot be used in many ways. And so at a time when we were heavily reliant on foreign funding to respond to the COVID crisis, just, a lot of that funding is no longer going to be available, or will have rules around it which make things extremely difficult. Again, similar to what we heard, corporates really slashed budgets. They focused all of it on healthcare, food relief, and migrants, which means things like education, advocacy, women's rights, tribal rights, etc. Will not see too much funding. both now as well as for the next 2 years, given that budgets will dry up in any case. The positive news really has been, again, similar to what other people talked about, just a lot more trust, a lot of trust, a lot of collaboration, just a set of people coming together very, very quickly, knowing that they had to respond. And so, with that, let me talk about 2 alliances that we built literally within 2 months, and this would never have happened otherwise. So during the migrant crisis, we actually reached out to 35,000 migrants and provided direct cash transfers. And we spoke to all of them and we said, look, I'm giving you relief money now, but what does recovery look like? And there wasn't one answer. What a sanitation worker goes through is going to be very different from a carpenter, is going to be very different from a street vendor. And so what we did is we created 2 alliances. The first is called Revive. It's actually funded by 4 global foundations. So the Omidyar Network, the Dell Foundation, USAID, Ford Foundation. And it's a $10 million alliance, which provides access to finance, access to employment and working capital for people who've lost jobs and small and very, very small entrepreneurs whose livelihoods have been disrupted. We didn't stop there. We actually went to corporates and we said, your business ecosystems have been impacted. So while the rest of India also needs your philanthropic support, until your business ecosystems revive, how do you get back to work? So your distribution networks, your supply chain, your contract workers. And that really resonated. And what we're now seeing is a large number of Indian companies really stepping up, saying that we have to support our vulnerable communities. And not just through this philanthropic funding, which is some sort of a shared value, but actually changing their own practices in terms of how they work with these contract workers or how they work with smaller enterprises, which we think is a remarkable trend. So the alliance is sort of more or less set up. We've already raised quite a bit of the money, which we didn't expect to, just given the environment. We have a second alliance called the India Protectors Alliance, which is supported by the Gates Foundation, Unilever, RBL Bank, 15 other corporates. And that's primarily meant to respond to sanitation workers and healthcare workers. And so initially, while the response was about really just helping the nation get back on its feet in terms of strengthening both our healthcare and sanitation response, increasingly we're thinking about it as a safe at work alliance. Because we're saying you're expecting hundreds of millions of Indians to get back to work, but they don't feel safe. They don't know what's going to protect them. I mean, every day we're expecting construction workers and maids and drivers and farmers to go to work, not knowing whether they're going to contract the infection, and if so, who's going to look after them. So we're really nudging corporate India and philanthropists and government to say, go beyond what you've traditionally done in terms of philanthropy, really amp up your commitment towards shared value and be more collaborative than you've ever been before. And just the one last thing I want to say is that, and Alina, you asked me about the SDGs. The SDGs has been a remarkable way to build these alliances, because otherwise, all of these stakeholders have very different conversations and different perspectives. But to really build alignment based on the SDG framework has, in some sense, allowed us to build these collaborations far more effectively, because there was at least a common framework where we're able to create some sort of shared narrative about what impact really means.
Okay, thank you so much, Priya. I'll definitely bring this up again, the question of sustainable development goals, primarily because this is the general theme of our conference. But before that, I would like to give the floor now to Roman Sklotsky. Roman represents Russia and the Center for Philanthropy Development, the Vladimir Potanin Foundation. And apart from giving us an overview how things have been in Russia in the philanthropic sector here in this country, Roman and his center have also made an overview of the COVID response in various countries, including BRICS countries as well. So Roman, if you could, give us an overview of the Russian situation and also make some maybe comparative analysis of what has been done in other countries, that will be great.
Thank you very much, Alina. I will try to. First of all, I would like to add some more complexity. I mean, it's all has been mentioned, but I would like to outline it specifically, as it has importance when we speak about our reaction to COVID-19. COVID-19 is not just the health pandemic, it's also the information pandemic. We have to deal with all the fake news about COVID-19, and it's also the fear pandemic, which is right now out of sight because many people are under huge psychological pressure, and it all is multiplied by the economic crisis. So I mean, we have to deal with a really complex problem, and yes, from the very outbreak of the COVID-19, we started to follow what our peers in different countries are doing, and we issued 3 digests. And one of the recent digests was on exactly on countries that are present on the panel today, and it's extremely interesting to hear now from the colleagues how it stands from their point of view, because we're of course limited in terms of the information available. And yes, we see many trends in common, and we see actually that pandemic has sharpened many questions, many difficult questions that we all have yet to answer. For example, how to keep the balance between the core mission and the necessity to react, how to provide or how to keep the solidarity, how to keep the sector and how to keep the people in the sector, which is a problem. And Priya was mentioning that some NGOs in India are now on the edge of being closed. Or what is the role of local communities and what is the role of grant-making foundations? How actually we all should, what should be the role of philanthropy in a normal life and also in the crisis? I mean, many interesting questions, and we indeed see many things in common between our countries as well. I will try now to outline very shortly the reaction lines here in Russia, and I'm sure that the colleagues will find many familiar things in their countries as well. Well, first, we see here the mobilization of civic activities. This is really great, and in my view, this is a temporary development, as it is usually with any crisis. But again, this is really great that people started to mobilize, be it neighborhood initiatives, or be it the initiatives of the community foundations, or be it this the pro-state movement called We Are Together, that united around 100,000 volunteers, and many other things. Also, it was expected, people started to donate more already in April. If you take the statistics, then the donations in April almost doubled as compared to April last year. If you speak about vulnerable groups, not about all the groups. But by August, it already came back. It is just 20% higher compared to the last year, and of course, it is expected and forecasted that the donations will actually go down. Then we see also the active role of community foundations that I already mentioned. This is everywhere in the world. We analyzed that community foundations in many countries took a very strong role in addressing the needs, because they know what is happening on the grassroots level. And even the data from previous crises, if you take the data compiled by the Foundation Center, then you will see that in 2008, the community foundations in the States played a huge role along with grant-making organizations. And yes, the grant-making organizations also played a very strong role here by launching anti-crisis grant competitions, issuing additional funds for NGOs, and by being flexible. For example, we as Vladimir Potanin Foundation, we joined the manifest of the European Philanthropy, where the grant-making foundations organizations obliged to be flexible, adaptive, and so on and so forth, to ease the situation for the grantees. And we as a foundation, actually, we launched 3 anti-crisis grant competitions for NGOs. It was a decision of our founder, and our budget in March just doubled overnight, and we had to distribute these funds by conducting these 3 additional grant competitions to support very different NGOs, from grassroots initiatives to infrastructural players. We saw here a development of coalitions driven by COVID-19. It was not enough, but still, as a phenomenon, it was great. You may look at the coalition called "The Care is Here," led by the Timchenko Foundation, which united hundreds of organizations dealing with elderly people. And the initiative was about identifying those invisible elderly people who need support and exchanging practices of how to approach them and how to help them. Finally, or almost finally, of course, the role of business and of big businesses, of corporations, was very notable here, mostly in terms of help to the healthcare system, to doctors, to medical staff, and to territories where they're present. And finally, we saw some improvements in terms of the sector regulation. There was a package of supporting measures issued by the government in spring, but mostly important is that we now have back the tax deduction on charitable donations to non-profits. This is the norm that was absent here for almost 20 years, and now this norm is back. And in fact, the sector was working on this norm for years, and the COVID provided this opportunity window to make it happen. And this is what we have. And again, COVID has positive sides like this. And what else? Just very generally, I would like to say that we analyzed the solidarity of the sector and we able to build coalitions in different parts of the world. And we noticed that our like BRICS part of the world is not really about coalitions, because yes, you mentioned that you have coalitions and like initiatives, but it's not compared to the States, to Europe, for example, it's not as systematic and it's not as, you know, thoughtful. It's more like action oriented and driven by the necessity to react rather than by the strategy. So that's what we see as a difference in the action models. Yes, because if you take the States in this initiative call to action, where like 800 organizations just undersigned it and agreed on the principles of how they should act in the crisis. Or if you take the manifesto of European philanthropy, the same, they just agreed on the principles. And this is what we as BRICS countries lack a bit, and this is what we have to think of when we have to deal with future crises.
That's great, Roman. Thank you so much for giving us this overview of both the Russian perspective and your considerations and reflections on philanthropy in BRICS countries in general. And now we have around half an hour for discussion. Евгения, могу вас попросить галерею вывести на экран? Dear participants, dear speakers, I would like to ask you, Louise and Nick and Priya, to switch on your camera, as we would really be happy to have some discussion now. And I would like to invite our listeners, to attendees of the conference, to send their questions if they wish. We have received now a question in our chat, and I will get back to it a little bit later. I'll first start with the question that I really hope to ask you all. But before that, I would like to take a step back, as you probably know that the theme of our conference is the role of philanthropy and social investments in the achievement of sustainable development goals. And basically how we work in the Russian Donors Forum is that we come up with a theme of the year early in the year, so somewhere in January. And of course, we didn't know that COVID will come, who knew? So basically, we decided that we will keep this theme, but we definitely had to enlarge, you know, those questions that we raised to COVID reflections. We can't do otherwise. But my mission is the same, that I would like to speak a little bit to you about sustainable development goals. And we would like to get your perspective, whether philanthropy has found itself in this work, work of other stakeholders for the achievement of sustainable development goals. Do foundations and companies who engage with corporate social investments, do they have strategies to do so? Is there any, you know, on the national level, any efficient system to involve all stakeholders to this work? All these questions are those that we are discussing during this week of our conference. And I would really appreciate if you could share your insights. How are the things now in your respective countries? What is the role of foundations and responsible business in the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals? Maybe I would like to invite Priya to start us off for this, because you were the one who mentioned Sustainable Development Goals in your speech.
Thanks, Alina. So I must say that I think before the crisis, the UN agencies in India were really ramping up a lot of the conversation around the SDGs, and as much as possible, were trying to engage both donors as well as corporates to try and align a lot of their work around it. We saw actually a lot of government excitement around it. So a couple of government initiatives started using SDGs as dashboards. So I think there was a nice beginning pre-COVID, and then all of it went for a toss because a whole bunch of the SDGs suddenly weren't as important as healthcare or food or livelihoods. So the challenge, I think, going forward will be how do you, while continuing to focus on these three issues, how do you start rethinking about other aspects of the SDGs, right? I mean, women's empowerment, for example, just went for a toss, and there were reports after reports across the country about violence that women were facing. They had lost their livelihoods. A lot of the families had come back home. They were bearing a disproportionate burden. So the question really is, how do we go from an original plan of how all of the stakeholders would come together to now a new, I wouldn't even say a new normal, but I would say a better normal, to say, how do you use this crisis, but also how do you use a lot of the positives around it, the trust building, the collaboration, the need to work in close partnership with each other, because you don't have enough money, but you have all kinds of issues to deal with. So how do you use the crisis as an opportunity to revisit the SDGs and revisit the strategies of the role that different organizations can play? I think a couple of trends that we're seeing right now is definitely, I think, corporate India realizing that corporate philanthropy, the way they thought about it, needs to be re-looked at just because the crisis is so close home, right? Beyond your workers itself, there's a large base of contract workers who are facing poverty. And so how do you get companies to rethink their strategies very quickly? The second is, how do you get government to have more trust in philanthropists and corporates, and in some sense, not just share the burden, but be proactive about creating these frameworks of opportunities. And third is, I think, we as a country have relied very heavily on foreign funders to drive a lot of the forward thinking, particularly around SDGs. And how do we get just Indian philanthropists to align themselves with the SDGs, but with a very close eye on what national or local priorities are right now?
Yeah, that's great, Priya. Is there anybody else who would like to comment? Maybe Andre, you?
Yes, I can comment, Alina. Thank you. I think Priya, when she first spoke about the SDGs, she mentioned that it was a great way to mobilize alliances and partnerships within philanthropy. I think that applies in the same way as when we look in Brazil. But we still lack a more comprehensive mechanism that is able to gather, report, and track advancements with the SDGs. But what we've seen more effectively is how the SDGs applies to more specific coalition within more specific areas. So I think it has been a great way to channel and sort of coordinate efforts towards the same lines. But in addition to this, one thing that I feel that was relevant in terms of the post-COVID response, in terms of how philanthropy is shifting, if we haven't seen yet a shift in how this is perceived by society in general, and I give you one example. In Brazil, we tax philanthropic donations the same way we tax inheritance. So this operates as a large disincentive for philanthropic investments. And this is something that hasn't changed, and in many ways isn't on the agenda of the public debate, as we've been struggling to make the case for the importance of civil society in the first place. So this is, so we're facing a much basic challenge as we look at the national debate around civil society and philanthropy. And what has been interesting to see is that in the same way that many philanthropic institutions have been distancing themselves from a more assistential approach, with the COVID crisis, they saw themselves having to move forward towards providing emergency response and identifying organizations that are able and had the capacity to carry out and channel a large sum of resources, and that was a challenge. So in some ways, it showed the importance of investing the long run in having strong civil society organizations with capabilities of acting in situations like this. So it's too early to say how this will shift the landscape of philanthropy and civil society in Brazil, but hopefully some of this experience will stimulate a debate in this direction over the next months or years.
Yes, Nick.
Sure. Can I come in? Yeah, I think from our perspective in South Africa, I think the SDGs have been underutilized really in terms of driving behavior. So there was a survey done in 2019 just looking at corporate reporting of the 320 listed companies. This was a survey done by a company called IRIS, Independent Reporting and Assurance Services. So they looked at 320 companies. They found that about 28% only mentioned the SDGs in their corporate reports, and of which only about 59 or 18% actually put any substance in behind their reporting. And our sense is that companies are matching what they're doing to the SDGs as opposed to using SDGs to drive behavioral change within their organizations. So you can map back pretty much any CSI or foundation work to an SDG of sorts, but is that actually, are you linking it to the indicators and the targets, and are you actually driving behavior as a result of that? And my sense is not. There are some initiatives in this country around building in common metrics around the banking and doing some research. But again, it's kind of bottom up. I don't think this is coming out of the corporate space saying how we're going to influence the SDGs. And yet, and I also believe that this can't be done, as I mentioned in my opening presentation, this can't be done in any meaningful way through the work of the community giving part or the foundation part of a company. It really needs to be the core of the business. If it's going to be, these are country goals, and corporates are small relatively within countries, and the CSI programs are relatively small within the corporate space. So it really is about enabling the company to drive these broader goals. And I'll give you an example. If you look at a tech company now, one of our cell phone operating companies has come out with a sort of purpose-led corporate statement around really connecting all people that haven't been connected for good. And I don't know what their byline is, but it's along those lines. And the foundation is coming in behind that, going where the corporate world can't reach into communities with non-viable commercial services in order to reach into those communities to provide education and connectivity services. So they really do meet the SDG 4 goal in terms of driving education in the country, and it is meaningful. But it's done through the company, not through the foundation, and they're doing it anyway. So it's a tie back, if you want, rather than something that's actually, I think, driving behavior.
Okay, that's a very great insight, Nick, and especially with the data that you have on South African companies that there are only 28 yeah, last year who mentioned SDGs in your survey. I would like to now take a question from our chat. So basically, our attendees ask us to take another step back and speak more about philanthropic sectors in your countries in general and some systemic trends. So basically, they're quite confusing terms, right? Philanthropy and charity. And while we professionals work in this sector, we tend to understand what is the difference. However, there might be some, like cultural interpretations, and it might be different how we interpret, how we understand philanthropy as a professional field of engaging foundations and many companies into some work for the communities. And charity may be something that is ad hoc, which is more general and which encompasses lots of different initiatives. Yeah, who's ready to kick off?
Well, I can comment. I think I made some comments that I think goes in that direction earlier, but I'd say that in Brazil, we've been for the past decades trying to, let's say, to move away from charity and develop, if I can say that, a more strategic approach to philanthropy with more investment in organized philanthropy, investing in developing infrastructure for the sector as a whole, developing mechanisms and so on. So I think that companies have moved a long way in that direction. We've seen new foundations emerging with this drive, which I think what is challenging is that sometimes when you lack basic infrastructure and basic response from governments, philanthropy is challenged in terms of how it should approach a more charitable work. And I think we've seen some interesting shifts in perspective of how these two relate. I tend not to see this as an evolution, but understanding that we need to provide means of ensuring, depending on the context, the basic elements, but without investing in infrastructure, in rights. In the long run, it's very difficult to believe that we'll move to, we'll be in a better position. In terms of the trends, I think I named a few. We haven't seen an expansion of philanthropy in sensible terms over the past decades. This is fairly stable. Although we don't have great data on this, we have rough estimates from different researchers that we were able to identify. We've seen growth in family philanthropy, which is something interesting to note. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen also expansion of grant making. If I can mention one issue that's very dear to my foundation in particular, there is a very strong debate around racial justice, which is something we are focused on. And this is also driving a different position in how both companies and foundations are seeing not only human rights issues, but how this affects in structural ways how democracy develops, how minorities can thrive. And I think, I don't know if this is a change that will remain in the long run, but I think this is something worth mentioning, particularly at this time.
Okay, that's great. Maybe Tao, I'd like to give the floor to you now.
Okay, in China, when we talk about the philanthropy, it's more related with the grant maker and rich people, philanthropists. The charity is more related to the nonprofit NGO, who is the fundraiser. So regarding the three like developing trends, I would like to highlight like three words. The first one is partnership. The second one is technology. The third one is online fundraising. So for the partnership, during the COVID-19, we find out those NGO leaders who has very good relationship with the government and with the business sector, they create a much bigger social impact because they have a very good relationship with the business sector, so they can raise a lot of money, and as well as they can use their business partners to purchase enough like drugs or enough some medicine, and then use their business partner to send the medicine to the hospital. So all this kind of transportation will be was supported by the business partner, and all this activity should get the permission from the government. So then the good partnership between the NGO and the government give them a very good space to really fulfill their mission. So that's the partnership. The second one is the technology. So for example, for this pandemic, the donation the NGOs raised changed everything. So in the very beginning, the government they wanted to get the data on how much donation the NGO raised and which kind of medicine they have sent to the citizen. But they find out according to the traditional way to collecting data by reporting one level to the next level, that's not in-time data. So they couldn't get the in-time data to make a effective or efficient decision. Then my team, the Yishan, our team, we use the data technology to we monitor over 10,000 websites to collect all the real-time donation information. Then we can offer this kind of data to the government, to the decision maker, let them make a smart decision or make a scientific decision. So after this kind of pandemic, the governments find out it's really they want to advance their digital technology to give better response in the future. So do some very strategical grant makers. The third one is online fundraising. We find out during the pandemic, there are lots of online fundraising, online donation. And in September, there is a big campaign, online fundraising campaign through in September 7th to 9th. So it's 3 days. 3 days, over about 5,000 Chinese NGOs. They send their project online and raise money. In 3 days, they raised over $400 million US. So 3 days online. So this is a huge amount of money come from the online. So the NGO side, okay, on one hand, we need to talk to some big donor, private donor, but on the other hand, we really need to use the online, the platform to find a more individual or small donor to keep their sustainable. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, Tao. Yeah, I think that we have during these COVID times a great number of examples of massive campaigns of individual giving that were so inspiring. Priyanik and Roman, would you like to give us an overview of 3 trends of philanthropic sector in your countries?
Yeah, I'll go first very quickly. So India is this country where everything that's true is also false and everything that's false is also true, right? On one hand, I think very much like what Andre said, which is we have a dysfunctional partnership currently between the government, the civil society, and philanthropists, and it's very confusing because the government is not able to reach the poorest. they need NGOs to step in, and yet the kind of regulation they create for NGOs and for philanthropists just is mind-boggling, right? It is the opposite of what it needs to be. So similar to what Andre said, tax laws are not in favor of either philanthropists or nonprofits. The regulation is changing, reporting standards are changing. So, on one hand, one sort of looks around and says, I mean, make up your mind. Either you need the sector to step in because you can't, or you don't need the sector to step in and you step up, right? So we have that situation. And on the other hand, I think India is full of examples of innovation, of collaboration, of really sort of cutting edge technology being deployed in the not-for-profit sector. The number of billionaires is higher than ever before. It increases every day. Corporates are giving a lot more money. So we have a CSR regulation which actually encourages corporate giving, which is fantastic. And yet, for example, even the way the regulation was drafted is it encourages corporate philanthropy, not strategic giving. So it's sort of mind-boggling in this very confusing way to say, what do you want, all of us to do? So I think that's me being frustrated and venting right now. But in terms of the trends, I think one, in spite of all of this confusion, we're seeing a lot more collaboration than ever before. People really stepping up and saying, if the government's not going to do it, if the corporate sector is not going to do it, we are going to do it, right? And we've seen individuals who would never have engaged with the corporate sector, with the nonprofit sector, really stepping up. I think the other big trend is just a lot of focus on innovation, because we're saying, forget about the traditional way of delivering support to the poor. Let's quickly sort of figure things out. So in April, I remember this, which is the lockdown happened towards the end of March. We said we wanted to reach migrants. Within 3 weeks, we reached 35,000 migrants, and that was because of technology. And so we're just leapfrogging and saying, not waiting anymore, just getting the work done, which I think is really a positive trend. I think the third trend is I think a lot of these global conversations. So this combination of what's happening in the world informing what India needs to do, but also a sense of Indianness and being authentic and local in our response. So the fact that these insights and experiences and information are coming from both sides is now giving birth to an Indian way of doing philanthropy, because a whole bunch of us who are currently in the Indian philanthropic ecosystem all studied outside. And so we are beginning to rediscover and refigure out what it means to actually be Indian and respond to these constantly evolving Indian trends. Yeah, so those are my three, lots of frustration, but lots of optimism, and then hoping that this collaboration will come together really well. And I have just one request, which is, I really enjoyed this conversation. And I like, if even we could talk more often, that would be great. And I have one request, which is, I've seen all of these things about how industries are shrinking and expanding. There is no industry report on the nonprofit sector. We have no idea how much money we've got. We have no idea how many jobs we've lost. We have no idea what the job opportunity is. I mean, shouldn't we, in addition to talking about the SDGs, also just create a metric for what a nonprofit industry or what a philanthropic ecosystem might look like, and have a commonly accepted set of framework around it? Because ultimately, every company who's donating in India is donating in every other. That's
great, Priya. Thank you so much for your remarks. I just wanted to say first that just one of the ideas behind organizing these sessions was like an initiative that Washington Forum is embarking upon. This is research philanthropy in BRICS countries, and we are really hoping to get all the insights that you have just shared today during this session, that we will manage to organize some more events so that we could definitely learn from each other, because I think that during this session we really heard that there are so many similarities, that we definitely share the same challenges in our environments, national environments. We have only 2 minutes left, and let me give the floor to each of you for maybe some last remark that you would like to share. Maybe if each one of you could share what is this one thing that you definitely would like to take with you after the COVID times, what COVID has taught you, and what you would like to take to the future. Nick?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's been a very useful session. I think just all the trends that we're hearing are common to us, and we shared that. But I think if the one thing that we can take forward would be how to innovate in this time and innovate through collaboration. I mean, if we can get that right, I think then we will benefit from the devastating impact that this COVID has had.
Yes, Andre, please.
Thanks, Alina. I think there are many. I think I mentioned some, but I think I point out two things. One is investing in strengthening civil society organizations in the long run and developing better data systems. So in times of this, we can have a better coordinated response. I would just like to echo Priya's comment. It's really great to have the opportunity to have this dialogue with you all, and I thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Andre. Tawa.
So for me, it's like no matter what's happening in the political world, we know in the non-profit world, we are sisters and brothers, so which makes me really happy.
Great. Priya, please.
Yeah, I would say collaboration, not because it's good to do, but we have to, right? And actually collaborate with with unlikely partners. I mean, I didn't come into this expecting to hear so much resonance in terms of what we are struggling with. So I mean, I would definitely say, stronger partnerships with people who think alike, who have the same intent, and ultimately have the same set of challenges. So we can take on each other's expertise and strengths and build on it.
Yeah, and Roman, last remark from you.
Yes, my pleasure. To me, it's more a conversation about the role of philanthropy, be it COVID or pre-COVID or post-COVID, in terms of what actually should we as philanthropic community do in terms of developing models, in terms of identifying inequalities, in terms of developing collaborations. So I mean, we can use different lenses like SDG or something else, which is definitely useful. But the major question is actually for all of our countries is about the real role of philanthropy and what power do they have and what power should be exercised. I think these are the questions for us to think in the future about.
That's great. Thank you so much to all of you, Tawa, Andre, Nick, Pri, and Roman, and Louise, who has dropped out. But we are really happy that we managed to have this conversation today, and we really hope that this is just the beginning for us to work together and see how we could learn from each other moving forward. And I would like to say thank you to all the attendees of the session as well. And just to let you know that at 4 p.m. we are going to have a session with the young people. We would like to explore what they think about their personal responsibility to social issues and what they think about philanthropy and maybe charity as well. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll see you later and have a lovely conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.